Welcome everyone to Living Libraries, Artists on the Geographies of Textiles. Thank you for joining us. Please note that closed captioning in English is available today by clicking on the CC button at the bottom of your screen. I'm Mathilde Walker-Billot. I'm curator of programming at the American Folk Art Museum. And I'm joining you today from Queens, New York. I want to acknowledge that our museum stands upon Lenapehoking, the unceded traditional homeland of the Lenape Delaware peoples. We honor Lenape people, past, present, and future, and are committed to centering Indigenous perspectives in exhibitions and programs at the museum. Next slide, please. As many of you know, the American Folk Art Museum is dedicated to the work of self-taught artists across time and space, and we're thrilled to offer a new perspective on the museum's collection with the exhibition An Ecology of Quilts, the Natural History of American Textiles, now on view at 2 Lincoln Square until March 1st, 2026. With a focus on process and labor, the exhibition traces the relationships between the environment and traditional quilting practices through a selection of 30 textile pieces dating from the 18th to the 20th centuries. It also features illustrations and material samples that highlight the botanical knowledge as well as the artisanal and industrial techniques involved in producing fiber, colors, and patterns. Organized in conjunction with the exhibition, today's program will focus on these techniques and the ways in which artists engage with them. I'm pleased to be joined by Julia Eller-Smith, who will be moderating the program and the conversation with our three speakers, Lauren Bartone, Swapnaa Tamhane, and Mallory Lowe Mpoka. Three artists who engage with natural elements and traditional processes in their textile-based practices. So hello and welcome to you, Julia. Thank you for joining us. To introduce you briefly, you're a curator, researcher, and writer based in Tontiaque, Monayang, and Montreal. Since 2019, you served as curator of research at the Leonard and Bina Ellen Art Gallery at Concordia University, where you've organized over a dozen solo and group exhibitions, including Swapnaa Tamhane's Never Was a Man. Next slide, please. It's an installation comprised of woodblock printing on drop cloth, dyed with indigo and synthetic colors, and appliqué. It presents two sentences from a poignant letter written by a Dalit PhD student, Rohit Vemula. And this letter became a symbol of Dalit resistance in India. And I had the chance to see this powerful installation last spring with you, Julia, and inspires us, the theme of this program that we co-curated. And this program for us is an opportunity to discuss and highlight traditional knowledge and textile craft and how they can carry and communicate resonant geographical, cultural, and political messages. So Julia, thank you for joining us. And before I hand it over to you, I want to remind our audience that this program will last for about an hour and a half. There will be time for Q&A at the end of the session. So please share your questions for our speakers throughout the talk using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. I'll be using the chat room to share more details about the speakers. So if you need any additional information about the speakers and about the program, you can drop me a line. And today's program is being recorded, and the recording will be made available online in the coming weeks. And again, we offer closed captioning in English, available by clicking on the CC button at the bottom of your screen. Our museum is grateful for opportunities like this program to connect online, which will not be possible without you. So I hope you'll consider supporting our program through a donation to the museum following this conversation. And now, Julia, the floor is yours, and please welcome our speakers.
Hello, everyone. It's so great to have the opportunity to gather online today for the program Living Libraries, Artists on the Geographies of Textiles. As Mathilde mentioned, I'm a curator and writer, joining you from the island of Geographies, Montreal, the unceded territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka, who are recognized as the stewards of the lands and waters. And I'd first like to thank Mathilde for inviting me to moderate this conversation, as well as the team at the American Folk Art Museum for hosting the event. I'd also like to thank our panelists, the stellar trio of multidisciplinary artists, Lauren Bartone, Mallory Lowe Mpoka, and Swapnaa Tamhane, who will be sharing about their practices and the ways they are embedded in the material histories of natural fibers and dyeing practices. To begin, let me briefly introduce our speakers. So first we'll hear from Bay Area artist Lauren Bartone, whose hand-dyed and sewn linen compositions intentionally play on conventions from landscape and still life painting, as well as on the long history of textiles. This work is the result of material experimentation in the studio alongside archival research about botanics, color, and the development of national identities. Her use of dyes with historical cultural significance, like cochineal, fustic, or indigo, is a reflection of her interdisciplinary approach and curiosity about the complex and sometimes contradictory ways meaning is created through imagery. Lauren is also currently pursuing a doctorate in Italian studies at UC Berkeley. Next, we'll have Mallory Lowe Mpoka, a Montreal-based artist of Cameroonian Belgian origins who works across photography, ceramics, textiles, sculpture, gardening, and natural dyeing. Her practice unfolds photography into an expanded sensual experience to address notions of place, home, memorialization, often reanimating and resituating her family archives. Positioned by the violence of colonization that inflicts historical and cultural rupture on identity, she engages in a multifaceted and fluid practice to explore the often elusive connections between real and imagined histories. Mallory is currently presenting her debut solo show at Fonderie Darling for Momenta Biennial in Montreal. And finally, we'll hear from Swapnaa Tamhane, whose artistic practice is dedicated to drawing, making handmade paper, and working with the material histories of cotton and jute, while her curatorial interests explore feminist histories in India. Her research-driven and collaborative approach includes skill sharing with artisan designers in Kutch, Gujarat, working with block printing and embroidery. Tamhane was recently shortlisted for the 2025 Sobey Art Award, and she's currently presenting work at the National Gallery of Canada. Before I hand it over to the artists, I'd like to offer a few opening remarks to frame our conversation. With the title of this event in mind, Living Libraries, Artists on the Geographies of Textiles, we're invited to think about how neither materials nor knowledge travel without carrying worlds with them. Textiles hold the memory of land, labor, and extraction. They also carry the intimate gestures of making, transporting, and circulating. Plants, fibers, dyes, and pigments contain histories, and those histories are activated, contested, and reinvented through these artists' hands. As we hear from them, I invite you to notice not only the botanical sources of their work, but also how they engage with the social and political worlds from which these materials emerge. Their practices trace routes shaped by colonial trade, migration, and industrial transformation, while foregrounding care, collaboration, and knowledge transmission that resist and exceed these systems. Some of them work closely with communities of artisans, others draw from inherited techniques that have crossed borders and generations. Their work asks us to consider who holds and protects knowledge, and how materials become repositories of identity, memory, and belonging. Across these practices, there is both a reckoning with the entanglements of colonialism and an effort to imagine new relationships between plants, land makers, and publics. So without further ado, I'll turn things over to Lauren to get us started.
Hi, thank you for having me. So as you mentioned, I'm a visual artist, and my work takes place in the studio as well as archival research. So as a graduate student in the Italian Studies department at Berkeley, a lot of my work looks at historical archives, including botanical gardens as a form of museum or library. Next slide. So this site is a place that I did an artist residency in a couple of years ago. And as a botanical garden, this is the Orto Botanico of Palermo. It kind of represents a complex history, a beautiful space that seems to offer an escape, but is actually deeply embedded in some of the challenging ongoing legacies of colonialism in our space and time. It represents a history that is kind of obscured sometimes by beauty, but is deeply intertwined in the production of how we think about national identity and cultural identity. Sicily is at the southernmost tip of Europe. It's right between Tunisia and mainland Italy. And so it also represents an interesting space for research because of its tropical or subtropical environment, and its history as sometimes what's referred to as an internal colony of Italy. Next. So this particular botanical garden was built at the very end of the Bourbon monarchy. So it really represents part of Spanish Empire in Sicily. And I included the map here just because to me, it was a physical environment that records both much older European histories of what plants can do and the ideas that are connected with them, along with there's a Linnaean section for Linnaeus's system of organizing plants, and an Endler section. So those kind of pre-modern colonial preoccupations with categorizing and organizing and collecting. And then the side of the garden that I worked the most on is the colonial garden, which represented a phase of research and investment in Italy's colonial expansion into East Africa and parts of North Africa. Next. So many of the plants that are remaining in the garden are legacies of these colonial expansions, most notably bananas, with Italy's colonization of Somalia was deeply invested in banana production. But the plants there represent kind of technological opportunities for empire, and both failed experiments and successful ones. Next. My work there in the garden was about being in the physical presence of these plants that have lasted or propagated over time. This, for example, is the ficus tree that grows really famously in Western Sicily, and is now a dramatic kind of sculpture in the garden, but really represents the hope of rubber production for the Italian government during the fascist era. Next. And the way I prepared for this residency was actually to make my own pigments. So this is walnut trees for my own garden here in California, where I'm traditionally based. And the process for making walnut ink is very traditional and really simple, and involves boiling walnuts forever. But it's also a very portable, easy painting material, a sustainable, environmentally friendly painting material. And so I brought the walnut ink from my own garden with me for this residency. And a lot of the time I spent there was doing painted studies in place. Next. But also experimenting with the physical plants themselves, and their remnants, so to speak. So this is a partial installation shot of some of what remains of the banana groves in the botanical gardens. Next. And eventually, at the end of my residency, I did an installation in a scientific exhibition space. So in these kind of science vitrines, I installed more of a creative or artistic look back at the legacy of this kind of plant collecting. Next. And the paintings or the drawings and the still lifes were mixed in with sculptural experiments using the plants themselves. These, for example, are the giant bamboo leaves. Bananas need to be protected from the winds in Sicily in order to be pollinated. And so giant bamboo was brought in to create a windbreak from the Scirocco winds. And now are, growing huge and huge, without necessarily, a strong historical context. So they have a personality of their own in the garden. But I was interested in thinking back about how some of their older uses of material experimentation and research were still embedded in the planting areas of these spaces. So these are woven bamboo leaves. Next. And there's the bamboo with the banana tree in relationship with each other. Next. Also, I focused on several trees in my research there, and also the dragon's blood tree was a really important one. The dragon's blood, or sangue del drago, grows in different places in the Mediterranean and in the Middle East. And it's not a textile dye, but it is a dye or a stain that was used on wood, among other things, as well as a medicinal plant. And so these were planted all over the territory of the garden that was originally a training area for colonial gardeners. So farmers could go there to be trained before being sent somewhere in a colonial expansion. And so the trees now don't have a functional use. They are more decorative, although the garden is absolutely maintained by the university and has other scientific research possibilities now. But they hold that embedded history. And that was really what I was interested in. Next. At the end of my residency, the material work, such as the weavings, actually went back to the compost pile or the sites of production. So the bamboo leaves went back to the bamboo trees and so on, just as a way of interrupting the tendency of art to become commodity in this way. Okay, next. My current research is much more invested in the development of color and national identity in modern nation states. So thinking about kind of the patriotic associations we have with color. And of course, that's synthetic now, but I'm very much interested in the botanic histories and the way certain colors and plants have moved with ideas around the world. So much of that in Italian studies is about the legacy of European colonialism. Most notably in the upper right-hand corner are the cochineal bugs. These are the insects that are harvested from the nopales cactus in Mexico. It was one of Mexico's largest exports to Europe, starting with the 16th century. And in my work, I'm using it to dye on linen. It's much more of a purple or pink color, but traditionally when used to be, dye silk or wool or even sometimes cotton, it holds a brighter red or carmine color. And I'm fascinated with this bug's history in becoming the most powerful tool of the Counter-Reformation in Italy. So the power of that dramatic red in Baroque paintings, in the material culture of the Catholic Church and the Vatican. If you think about the red in Caravaggio's paintings or the red in a cardinal's cloak in the Vatican, that is a cochineal red. But of course, it replaced older colors and older ways of making red in the Mediterranean. And so I'm interested in comparing those. Some of the other colors I'm using are traditional Mediterranean plants, like the weld, which is the yellow right below it. Of course, there's a very complex history of indigo that we'll hear more about in a bit. And then fustic, which is the bark above, and fustic comes from a tree in Central and South America and is, before artificial dye, is a color that was associated with the khaki of military uniforms, specifically colonial military uniforms. My experiment has been kind of tracking down the evolution of military uniform colors and thinking about how they changed over time and got to be associated with national identity in some way. So in Italy, that references the history of the Savoy blue through this kind of khaki color and a olive drab in military. Next. These are some of the work that I've been producing with these dyes. So these are from an exhibition called Ribbon Rack at the Sarah Shepard Gallery. And the one on the left-hand side features just cochineal dye with different kind of degrees of dye wash on linen sewn. And the one on the right includes some kind of washed out cochineal dye on linen alongside fustic, which is that khaki color, military color. Next. The idea of this exhibition was comparing the very feminized history of textile design and thinking about textiles as being something in the domestic domain versus the much more industrial and colonial histories of textiles. So Ribbon Rack is a play on the idea of something feminized or decorative like a ribbon versus Ribbon Rack is also the kind of pin that you wear on your military uniform to indicate rank and experience. And so my paintings are abstract. They're playing with the idea of how landscape and still life are represented, a certain perspective about seeing space, but they're also invoking this idea of kind of colonial order and making sense of the world through color. Next. This is one of the experiments playing around with indigo, very subtle washes of indigo on linen layered over weld. There's little bits of the fustic and the cochineal to get brighter oranges. And next. Eventually, this produces a combination of colors that brings us maybe closer to what we think of as military uniform, the olive drab. So this is indigo over fustic. And then the last slide. There's an exhibition installation shot. And the last slide is kind of my current experiments with looking at some of those older versions of red. This is a different scale insect on the right that's from traditionally from Sicily and other places in the Mediterranean. It's called Kermes vermilio. It's very rare and way too expensive for experiments, but it made a beautiful, rich, traditional red before the arrival of cochineal in Europe. And so those are some of the kind of histories I'm looking at recovering in my work, along with other colors like alkanet, which is more of a blue-gray. Okay, I will leave it there. Thank you.
So next, we'll hear from Mallory Lowe Mpoka.
Hi, everybody. I will start by just talking a bit about my current practice. So my practice unfolds photography into an expanded sensual experience to address notion of home, place, and moralization. But it's also a practice that is multifaceted and fluid, that explore the often elusive connection between real and imagined stories. And by supplementing the materiality of the photograph with weaving, ceramics, dyeing, and sculptural augmentation, I kind of resituate and reanimate my family archive into my practice to express that kind of nomadic state of constant in-betweenness through the incorporation of different time period and spatial connection. Next slide. And so, yeah, it's a practice that is situated between weaving, ceramics, photography, and farming. Next. So gardening as a system of care, we can go to that slide. My current research is interested in the intersection of colonial resource extraction botanical knowledge and cultural resistance. Next slides. Colonial botanic garden and geological mapping function as instruments of imperial control for a long time, kind of reshaping landscape and erasing indigenous knowledge. Next. And so in response to, kind of the African diaspora community, particularly through an Afro-feminist lens, and also practice of marronage and land autonomy and community of resistance, and how they have preserved agro-botanical knowledge. I'm kind of diving in this kind of research at the moment to tie them to my current practice. Next slide, we can. And so these history resonate with me today and forming kind of, my interest in bioclimatic architecture. So using local material to think about the city and where we live. And so thinking about approach in grounded in local material and climate responsiveness. Next slide. So again, and so my research aimed to kind of highlight the enduring impact of colonialism on ecological transformation, cultural resilience, and the pursuit of sustainable future. Next slide. So I've been involved for the past 3 years with Growing Arc, which is kind of a collective playground, collective of farmer and urban agriculture that have some garden in Montreal, in Île-Sainte-Hélène, and also in Île-Boucherville. And it's been founded by Nadia Bunyan, who's a community organizer, fashion designer, and researcher in sustainable practice based in Montreal. And so with them, I've kind of been cultivating cotton, linen, indigo plants. Plants are native to different regions of the world, including, here in Geographies, Montreal, Canada, but also the African continent, the Caribbean. And so seeing how the plants grow and also cultivating that relationship of understanding the process of cultivating a plant, but also processing it. And so next slide. And so how can we, for example, use Palestinian here? We see on the left, it's Palestinian flax, how we can transform it into linen. And then when we have a linen fiber, how can we weave with it? So I've been working with them in terms of fiber transformation and understanding the process of working with living being. So next slide. And so my work is also very informed by Dr. Leconte Gidil essays titled Maroons, Black Girlhood in Plain Sight, which frame Black people historical engagement in marronage as both a strategy of resistance and a practice of community building. So for those who are not familiar with the system of marooning. So marooning was a practice of leaving the plantation during the 18th, 19th, 20th century, especially during the transatlantic slave trade. There were a community of African-American slaves that were leaving the patron property to escape to often a secluded area where they will build independent resistance community among themselves to survive away from oppression. So that researcher really inspired me in my practice because she positioned Black girl and Black women as contemporary maroons. So enacting everyday form of survivance through poetry, songs, rituals, storytelling, embodied practice. So I'm looking at, gardening as an act of marooning. And so, next slide. So building a garden in an exhibition space using indigenous plant from Canada, Cameroon, and Senegal can be also seen as a contemporary act of maroonage to me. And so just as historical maroon created autonomous space beyond colonial control, the garden reclaim also institutional space for living and self-determined practices. So by centering the spiritual, but also the medicinal knowledge of these plants, I kind of try to revive the suppressed Black and Indigenous knowledge and epistemology. So here we have Deborah's Garden was now showing at Fonderie Darling in the context of Momenta Biennale in Montreal. And so it's a multi-tiered red brick garden that welcome plants from native plants from Cameroon, Senegal, as well as Canada. Like sweetgrass, sorrel, indigo, kinkeliba, white sage, etc. And I've spent the last 2 months, before the exhibition in the greenhouse of UQAM University to grow these seeds that have been collected across continent, including in Senegal and Cameroon by my aunties and by traditional herbalist friends to grow them and plant them in this garden. And so next slide. So I'm very much interested in the work also of Sarah Mapps Douglas. So Sarah Mapps Douglas was an African-American educator, artist, and abolitionist. And in the 1806, she was working around the mid 18th century. We used botany and natural science as a tool of empowerment for Black women. And through teaching and botanical illustration, she kind of encouraged women to study plants, not only for scientific knowledge, but also for spiritual reflection, healing, and intellectual freedom. Next slide. And so connecting to my research, like Douglas, my work is really interested in indigenous and diasporic plant material, kind of reclaiming a form of resistance, care, and cultural memory. And so, next slide. And so that's why my relationship to land is very important in my work, especially so I have also Cameroonian heritage from on my paternal side. And so I use a lot of time in my practice, I use the laterite red soil of the western region of Cameroon that I turn into fine pigments through the process of levitation to then dye the textile that is used that is used for my installation. So here we see the matriarch. So the matriarch is dyed with, like I was saying, the highly fertile red ferralitic soil found in the highland region of West Cameroon. And it's made of more than 300 recycled linen and cotton panels that have been repurposed from my family's sewing workshop in Douala, Cameroon. And so I kind of, in this work, I intertwine and rearrange self-portrait with also familial photographic archive to kind of weave past and present and offer this kind of web of personal and collective memory. And so when following my grandmother passing in 2023, I was appointed as her successor and the new family matriarch. And so, I think that this installation kind of adopt the form of a lighthouse also as a symbol of offering kind of a guidance and inviting viewer to converge around its luminous aura. And so being also the new matriarch in my family means that um, I'm taking on, next slide, I'm taking on also roles of memory worker, of archiver, and I came back from Cameroon in 2023 with a lot of photographic archive, photo object, textile, and that's what I've also informed a lot of my work that have followed. Including this work in the Weft of Memories. It's a jacquard weave cotton textile installation inspired by two self-portraits in which I'm sitting myself in front of myself, where there's two smaller frame that are heirlooms of my grandmother posing also herself in the 60s. So it's kind of an imaginary dialogue between me, myself, and my grandmother, weaved with cotton thread, also been dyed with the red soil of West Cameroon. So next slide. So I'm also working on a research project titled Indigo Tells, Indigo Tells. Next slide. So indigo is used as a medicine as well as a dye, and that's what is also fascinating to me. When I had a bad digestion as a child, often my aunt would make me concoction from the leaf of the indigo plants from my grandfather plantation in Batoufam. And so my current research investigate kind of the existing tie between the many different people that have made indigo an integral part of the transatlantic colonial experience that profit us still today. And the project investigated the relationship between indigo and the use of land, slave labor, textile manufacture, and consumption, even fashion expression and the development of present-day Western wealth. And if we return to the first slide, just for a moment. The image on the left is an image of my grandfather. So my grandfather is the man on the right, wearing the ndop cloth. So the ndop cloth is a traditional royal cloth. It's a cotton weave indigo dye cloth that has been present in Banike Cameroon culture for centuries. And so my interest in the indigo and the process of using indigo and cotton has started with that photograph. So photography is always a bit the foundation of my research. It's always sparkle curiosity, and then it lead me to a wider and broader research. So next slide. So I just want to read, next slide. So I just want to read a quote that has resonated with me during my research by Bonaventure Sobejendikun. He was talking, he was having a conversation and visiting the studio of Malian indigo dye master Abubakar Fofana, and he said that Abubakar Fofana is also constantly reminded to be humble because unlike a painter who goes out to buy his paint or a photographer who buys film to use, his material is on many levels living. From the seed he has to plant to grow the indigo plant, to the care he has to give for the plant to grow, the people he has to work with in harvesting the indigo leaves, and then the processing of indigo, to the care for the indigo culture, which is itself made up of living organisms, bacteria that have to be cared for too. So this care becomes important in his practice, which he has come to see as a collaboration between himself and all the other living and non-living beings involved in this process of indigo making and cultivation. It is a reciprocal relation. The artist must have faith in his material and the material in him. Whatever one might choose to call art between the blue of nothingness and the blue of divinity is determined by the care one offers. So art is observation, interaction, respect, care, compassion for the subject one is engaging with. So this quote is resonating a lot of in my practice because I'm very much interested in the spiritual property of plants, the medicinal property of plants, and as a way of remembering, a certain heritage, and so and also that kind of humble experience that you can have when you farm, it's really a relationship of reciprocity between another living being. So next slide. So yeah, it's also interesting because the textile origin of jeans and denim, when we talk about indigo, as also pop up in my research, and how during colonial expansion, Europeans sought to cultivate indigo in the Americas, but lacked kind of the practical knowledge to process it because it's kind of complicated. And so enslaved African, particularly from region like Senegambia, Sierra Leone, Cameroon, brought deep expertise in growing, fermenting, and dyeing with indigo. And so their technical and cultural knowledge made indigo production possible in the colonies, such as South Carolina and the Caribbees. Next slide. And so just to wrap up the presentation, so this is kind of the my next research, and being interested in making the bridge and relationship between cash crop plants that have migrated as much as human plants also migrate seeds, and so make the relationship with how things are transported across ocean. So voila.
Thank you so much, both Lauren and Mallory, for these great presentations. And we'll hear next from Swapnaa Tamhane before we open for conversation.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mathilde, for the invitation. And thank you, Mallory and Lauren. It's so amazing to hear about your work and your methods and processes. Next slide. So I've come to working with textiles through drawing and through making handmade paper from cotton, specifically khadi, so hand-spun, hand-woven cotton. And through making paper, what you can see, this is this very thin, transparent, fluffy, also very challenging to draw on. I was really thinking about my surface as one that could be a metaphor for resistance, as khadi or cotton was a key material utilized in the independence movement in India. And working with making paper really opened up a research-driven process looking into the history of textile production in pre- and post-independent India. So my starting point for much of my work has also been to question why ornamentation has been derided in Western modernism, and I was curious to see if an ornament could hold a larger story or a motif could represent multiple complex histories, and if a motif could resist simply just being part of a pattern that we read over time and space. Next. In 2018, I began working with Salih Mahmud Khatri in Ajrakpur, which is a village in the western region of Kutch, Gujarat. We somehow got paired together because he was open to experimentation, even though there is a strong emphasis on maintaining and celebrating the complexity of Ajrak, which is a textile art that involves block printing with geometric motifs and the use of natural dyes, the most iconic being indigo. These motifs are printed on cloth that are used in a myriad of ways, from specific wrapping styles of turbans that are distinct community to community, to bed coverings, to a shawl. And in this kind of predominantly desert environment, those blues and reds of Adrak almost sort of sparkle against their white clothing. Next. So I wanted to share this quickly, which is to show you that true Adrak is printed on both sides while the resist is still slightly damp. And you can see the right is an example by master printer Sufyan Khatri, while on the bottom left is my my little attempt, and you can see how difficult that is. Adrak is known to incorporate up to 16 steps of printing and dyeing of each color or each dye. The village of Adrakpur was created and named after this textile art by several printers following the devastating earthquake in the region in 2001, which some of you may remember. Salim Ahmed Khatri is originally from Dammarka, which is about 45 kilometers from where Adrakpur is today. And he told me that the minerals in the water shifted after the earthquake and affected the way the dyes were looking after being washed. So it took Salim Ahmed 2 very long, painful years to establish his business and home in this new village. Next. Adrak is also, kind of historically produced in the Sindh province of Pakistan, where indigo used to grow in abundance along the Indus River. Next. So you can see here the motifs vary from the Sindhi Adrak to the motifs that are used in Kutch. I wanted to work with Adrak block printers in Kutch because of their language of geometry that was aniconic and the complexity of these incredibly intricate motifs believed to reflect twinkling stars, elements of architecture, or floral designs. Next. I created motifs using this particular building as a visual source. This is the Mill Owners Association building by Le Corbusier, a Swiss-French architect. And this was built in the early 1950s in Ahmedabad, which is a city known for block printing and textile production. What Corbusier calls Palais de Filature was created as a private headquarters, but is now open to the public by appointment. I first visited in 2015, and this building really stayed with me, as I had never seen a sort of open building that was open back to front with views of the street on one side and the grand Sabarmati River at the back. I was fascinated by this modernist building commissioned by an elite group of patrons whose wealth was built on industrial textile production, which the British only allowed in the mid-1800s in India. So the kind of mill sort of first started in Bombay around 1840, and then Ahmedabad was the second largest textile producer and still is. I found the whole utopic desire in the post-colonial, post-independent landscape so enthralling. Like the waking dream of this new nation could be felt in this building, even though Corbusier was working on Chandigarh, which is a much larger project at the same time. Next. So some of my motifs are based on the interiors of this petit palais, like the lines of the Burmese teak panels in the auditorium. These sort of swirl, the lines sort of swirl around you. They look like fabric when you're standing inside of this very sort of cathedral, cavernous-like space. Next. So you can see that I've translated those lines and swirls into this motif. Next. Next. And while this was originally printed and dyed in 2020, in April of this year, I went back to this work and added this beading. So some of these works, I kind of produce over a period of time, and then I'll sort of sit with it, and it takes me a bit of time to work through how I want the work to be resolved. Next, so this next motif you can see kind of has more of those sort of straight lines that would be more connected to Adrak, even though it is not at all what they do in Adrakpur. Next. And all of these motifs are part of this installation, Mobile Palace, which is currently on view at Mead Art Museum in Amherst, part of Amherst College. Next. And in each panel, you see the motifs as complete and incomplete, separated out in the line and filler blocks, or you'll see beading catching light or applique, sort of to interrupt how those patterns are read. Next. Next. Saleh Mameth has also used synthetic dyes for this work. Do Hands Have a Chance? And this tent concept is actually the first project and what led me to working with textiles so directly, as I wanted to collapse Corbusier's building into a soft, mobile structure that could be a palace for one, a little shamiana or tent for one. Next. I also wanted to work with Adrak because of the key use of indigo. So I've always been drawn to indigo because of its political history as the first peasant uprising in 1859 to 1860. But I haven't previously spoken about the significance. It was kind of a quiet note for me. However, the history of this revolt is an enduring resistance that sits in the materiality of each work. So the image on the left or the right are some dye tests that include a dyeing technique called Mina, and that you can see on the furthest right, in which the cloth is dipped into indigo twice, creating an incredibly deep ocean-like blue. Next. That depth of blue is what has made indigo, or this low shrubby plant, Indigofera tinctario, so desired around the world for centuries. The indigo is invisible in the leaf, actually, and is attached to a glucose. When the leaves are soaked in water, the glucose separates, and the remaining liquid contains the indigo white, or invisible indigo. Through the addition of oxygen being whisked in by paddles, the liquid transforms from a yellow-green to a deep blue. This liquid is fermented and reduced down and is dried then into these cakes. Next. The plant was transported to colonial centers, as Mallory was just speaking about, until the British lost their grip on America and realized that it could grow in abundance in areas of Bengal and Bihar in the northeast and east of India. Indigo was so high in demand that the British enforced what was called the Teen Katta system. So 3 units of land for every 20. Those 3 units had to grow indigo, and they gave peasant farmers high interest loans to grow indigo in replacement of crops like rice. Ending up in a cycle of generational debt, many farmers became bonded indigo laborers, and this led to the year-long revolt in 1859, which led to the Indigo Commission report that revealed these abuses, and farmers were no longer forced to grow indigo. However, 30,000 acres of active indigo production was active up until 1908, with up to 4,000 tons coming from Kolkata alone. Next. So here you can see they're whisking the liquid. Next. So in this new work, this is more recent, I wanted to make a block print with the formula of indigo, both in its invisible indigo white and visible state. Indigo is comprised of 16 carbon atoms, 10 hydrogen atoms, 2 nitrogen, and 2 oxygen atoms. These 2 prints are made on drop cloths or waste cloth, next, that is used on long print beds and are the fabrics that absorb any excess residue. Next. So I've actually been working with these drop cloths, or achadias, as they're called. And in a way, it was to use all the fabric that is part of any production for my work. So next, you can see here that the achadias, when they're dyed in indigo, they sort of reveal all the residual traces of all the block printing. So you can see sort of the mix of Adrak and then the motifs from the Corbusier building. Next. And in this work, I wanted to have that indigo chemical compound present as a residual trace in the achadia. So this is currently on display, part of the Sobey Art Award exhibition at the National Gallery of Canada. And if you go to the next slide, so here in this sort of shortest cabinet, this one is purely with the indigo compound achadias or drop cloths. And it's interesting that this talk is called Living Libraries because in a way these cabinets are very much, they're sort of both domestic structures as well as these kind of conceptual structures, but very much speak to the home, as well as somehow speaking to this idea of like containers of knowledge. And yeah, they're very much, I was thinking about my mother's closets and my aunt's closets, but also thinking about these sort of oral traditions of how knowledge is passed. When someone like Sufyan Qatri comes from like 10 generations of block printers. So in a way, the use of indigo is to relay the heritage importance of craft knowledge while making a unique work that is the result of a process of layered, residual sort of palimpsest type printing. And I'm interested in that kind of magic of the transformation through oxygen, of the invisible indigo that suddenly becomes a hue. And I was thinking about the same invisibilization of the labor of the farmer, as also craftspersons are also rendered invisible. Often their work is never ascribed to a single person, and they're also exploited for economic purposes. So this kind of use of indigo really is that kind of first moment of protest against the British in 1859. And it sort of led to Gandhi's first civil disobedience movement when he came back to India. And this took place in Bihar in 1917. And this laid the roots sort of for the larger freedom struggle to come. So yeah, much of my work is really kind of looking at these like very complex moments in which a nation kind of announces itself. So I will end there. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much to all of you, all three of you, for these incredible presentations. We're going to start the conversation part among all four of us. But this will be before we open up questions to the public. So I invite you all to start thinking about questions you may want to ask our speakers, or type them up in the chat. And Mathilde will be looking at them and relaying them to us. So I wanted to ask a few questions that would allow us to make connections between the exhibition at the American Folk Art Museum and these three incredibly rich practices we've been hearing about. So to start, I wanted to focus on this piece, this whole cloth quilt that is in the exhibition. And it's a vibrant piece that we find in the first room when we enter. And then to achieve this deep and brilliant, the deep and brilliant reds that we see in it, the curators are telling us that the makers have likely used a variety of dye stuff, including madder and cochineal. Cochineal, which Lauren told us about, is made of tiny female insects that feed on the nopal cactus. And this knowledge of this pigment draws from thousands of years of indigenous knowledge from Mesoamerica and the Andes. After colonization, though, this knowledge expertise was extracted, exported, and commodified across the world. Yet, when we look at these vibrant reds that today, we can see that they still hold within them the craft and the layered histories of technique, labor, and land. So I wanted to ask a question about the exchange that happens between research and practice, between the materials and your knowledge. So what do materials teach you? How has working hands-on with these materials changed the way you understand the techniques, the communities, and the landscape they come from? So in other words, how does making inform your research? Lauren, would you like to answer?
Sure. I feel like I have to start by saying with this particular red piece, what a beautiful contrast between grabbing attention with color versus grabbing visual attention with color versus needing a textile experience to understand the nature of the quilting on the piece. Like the quilting is not always visible, from a distance in the way color is. And so that even just experientially, that material experience is so important to textile work. For me, in even just experimenting with red, with red color, I've been constantly surprised by the behavior of materials in my studio, and them being very different than what an archival source might describe their use as. So, for example, in contrasting cochineal versus the Kermes vermilio that I've been working with, I knew the Kermes was precious. I had read that it was, a rare and important thing, but it wasn't until I put the same amount of cochineal versus Kermes to dye a piece of fabric that I realized how much more dye cochineal has and how many more Kermes vermilio scale insects you would need to have to produce this kind of red. And that's something that you can read about, but is very different than when we're actually producing a dye. And I found that fascinating.
Yeah, thank you. Mallory, you were mentioning Sarah Mapps Douglas and a few inspirations that you find in writers, curators. So how do you, how does that enter in dialogue with your hands-on practice, from gardening to dyeing to weaving, etc.?
Yeah. I don't know if we have her image or picture in the presentation. But yeah,
Would you like to share?
Maps Douglas.
Oh, yes, we have it here.
But yeah, it's interesting that, like I was saying earlier, so she's an African American indicator, artist, and abolitionist. We used botany and natural science as tools of empowerment for Black women. And so through her teaching and botanical illustration, she kind of encouraged women to study plants, not only for scientific knowledge, but also spiritual reflection, healing, and intellectual freedom. And so so her Douglas research resonates a lot with mine in the sense that my work with indigenous and diasporic plants reclaim also a certain botanical knowledge. Not only botanical, but also spiritual knowledge as a form of resistance, care, and cultural memory. And, using plants as a living archive, that kind of center more marginalized voice, and how Black and Indigenous women's relationship to land, healing, and knowledge can go beyond colonial framework. So yeah.
So perhaps you could expand on what does being on site in Cameroon and working with the pigment directly, what do you feel the pigment itself, the material, has taught you?
Yeah, I think, it's just being inspired by the environment that is, that also live within me. So when I go to Cameroon, so basically my family house is in West Cameroon in the village of Batoufam. And so the soil is red, it's rich in iron oxide. The house are made of red mud brick. And so everywhere you go, even on the leaf, on the trees, in the carpet in the house, the curtains, they are tainted by this color. So it's a color that inhabit you. It's a color that live with you. And and I like to think about material not only for its scientific property, but also metaphorically, spiritually, what it offers, you know? And so there's also there's been like a genocide in the 70s and the 60s in that region, a genocide of the Bamileke people in Cameroon. And so when we think about the color red, what can it ignite in you? And so I use this color in my practice through a levitation process of the extraction of the fine pigment powder, as a way to ties and to create kind of a chromatic world in my work.
Thank you. Swapnaa, you make your own paper at times with cotton fibers. What could you talk to us a little bit about what also what materials have taught you as you experiment?
Sorry, what was the last thing you said?
Oh, as you experiment with the materials.
Yeah, I mean, it's, well, the khadi that I've used, how do I put this really simply? So there's khadi that's like part of this kind of government program where you can buy khadi from shops, and it's, produced almost at an industrial scale. And then in this region of Kutch, there has been a program to replant an indigenous seed, which is called kala cotton or black cotton, and it's an organic cotton seed. So I've been recently working with any excess yardage to make paper from any of their scraps that they're not using for their for clothes or for kind of their yardage that they're selling. So I work with an NGO in Kutch called Kamir. And yeah, the excess yardage, because cotton also has a lot of oils in it. So there's things that sort of come up when I'm making paper that are making the pulp that are a little challenging. And I'm also interested in just like merging colors together, like those natural dyes, and just seeing what emerges from that. And I'm making some more kind of sculptural works now with the paper pulp. But in terms of learning from the fibers, it's so, firstly, the process of making paper pulp is very interesting when you see the yarn kind of shift into something that begins to tear. That's really a fascinating moment. It's really a magical moment. And I'm interested to see if those surfaces really can speak of all of the histories. I mean, cotton is linked to the entire globe. It's not just this, it's like one thing happened in, the Civil War kind of started in America, there was the flax began to, well, originally was from Crimea, Russia, then it stopped being produced there, then it starts getting produced in Dundee, and then they start producing jute as a result. So all of these kinds of materials like cotton, jute, they're all linked to they're linked in a global way in global trade. So I'm interested to see if, my surface can speak about all of that. And then my use of mirrors, it's so interesting to see, Mallory, how you're using like the red brick in your work and how influenced you are by that. It's the same for me. Like my family's not from Kutch, but I spent so much time there, and sort of visiting and exploring and seeing where weavers live, or kind of going out to villages. I'm so influenced by those like adobe homes, both in their structure and their use of mirrors. And so that all of that mirror work has come directly into my work. So I'm getting led by these kinds of materials that are, cotton used to clothe the body, but now also mirrors are used on the body, and they're also used in architecture. And I kind of love that relationship. And I love how textile can be both like two-dimensional and also three-dimensional. It's also very interesting to me. So I don't know if I've quite answered your questions, but it's like, in a way, it's like literally like this like thread of the cotton has like led me into so many points of research that I feel it's like a story that just kind of keeps unfolding.
Thank you. I'll move to another work in the exhibition I'd like to highlight, which is by Japanese-American textile artist Tomi Nagano's Ajiro Munio. It's a quilt that's made of hundreds of upcycled kimono fragments, and in it, the artist brings together a family practice passed down through generations of patching and reworking garments and bedding. And then also blending a traditional Japanese basket weaving pattern known as ajiro, which is a form of herringbone. I wanted to ask a question about how do memories live in your hands as you cultivate, dye, weave, or print with plant materials? And then how are you thinking about the path of previous generations and creating a record of personal or inherited stories? Is someone want to start us off with this question?
I can start.
Thanks,
I was thinking in terms about inherited memory and the body, even especially in textile production. So many of us come from families where there was some form of textile production. Maybe not in the last generation, but at least in the ones before. And so much of I think our gestures and our even just thinking about the way we work with our hands as artists, I think holds the memory of a grandparent. And I know that came up in your work, Mallory, the jacquard, looking at yourself, looking at your grandmother. Those portraits really remind me of like how memory is held in the body and in textile history. But also smell. So looking at this image, I can smell the indigo from here, and all of these materials that we work with have very specific sensory experiences that maybe are not always visible from, definitely not experienced through, digital experience, but even from looking at a finished object, sometimes you don't have all of the sensory memories that come from the cultivation of those materials.
Thank you, Lauren. Swapnaa, Mallory, shifting the attention from the material to the hands. Would you want to comment on this?
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, I don't have textile makers in my family, but somehow all the women, they had such an inherited knowledge of where textiles were coming from which part of the country. And there was always this conversation, like when they were putting something on, or it was like this communication of knowledge of this is why this is important, this is how it was made. And I've always wondered, like, how did they know that? How do they know, like, a Sambal sari, from Orissa, or a Jamdani from Bengal? Like, how do they know without having traveled to these areas often? This is like 70s, 80s, there wasn't that much traveling internally within the country as there is now. And I think for me, that's sort of one thing that kind of sat in my brain. And then the other part for me is this, when I'm applying mirrors to the drop cloths, it's like I'm applying mirrors to the areas where there is a mark already existing. So it's not a totally arbitrary, I feel like it's very much like a sort of call and response. So whatever is coming through in that direct printing or in my printing, I'm responding to that. And it's like, I can see the stamp, I can hear, like, as you can smell the indigo, Lauren, I can hear the stamp of the wood block. And I can see Saleh Mahmoud is producing at a commercial level. So I can see the repetition of certain areas, and I can see also like a speed of working. It's just very interesting because my motifs are completely different and like very arbitrary. So that application is almost like I'm like carrying the story forward in a certain way.
Mhm. Mallory, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, when we talk about archive or sensibility to some material that then lead us to do research into a specific topic, and think that also coming from Cameroonian Bamileke heritage as well as a Belgian heritage, I've been very much exposed to uncle growing up wearing the dub cloth, which is like I was saying earlier, that indigo dye cotton weave cloth. And so I was kind of the first born of first generation immigrant in Canada. So I was a lot at family reunions, men political talk. And so I was a bit submerged by this presence of African men wearing that cloth. And so growing up with these sensibilities and these visual elements, I kind of later on asked myself of how that dub cloth was made. And so that led me, like Swapnaa was saying earlier, to that expensive and infinite road of the cotton, the cotton, manufacturing and textile manufacture, consumption, and indigo dye, the transatlantic ties with that plant. And so yeah, but and also, like I was saying earlier, my research also stem a lot from family photographic archive. So for the indigo research, it stemmed from that one photograph of my grandfather wearing that specific cloth.
Thank you, Mallory. I'll ask one more question before we address some of the questions in the chat. Looking at another work from the exhibition, The Lady of the Lake quilt from 1837, to talk about a little bit what you were referring to, Mallory, which is more the circulation and the transportation that textiles go through, and that lead to, in a way, a decontextualization or a loss of either their original meaning. So plants, textiles, pigments, we know they don't just move as goods, they carry knowledge and cultural borrowing. And then in this textile, we see chintz, which is a clear example that was developed in India through hand painting and block printing with natural dyes, but later industrialized in the UK during colonial expansion in the 17th and 18th centuries. And with over time, it's been rebranded almost as an English pattern with its origins uprooted and appropriated. So I wanted perhaps to conclude, if you could talk about how you navigate these histories of knowledge displacement and how you account for indigenous knowledge or original cultural contexts. Perhaps Swapnaa, I mean, you've already addressed this, I think, from collaboration. Working collaboratively is such an important part of your work. Is that one of the ways you decide to kind of honor, original context and original histories of making?
In a way, I think I wanted to learn, or I was really interested in forms of fine art pedagogy in the West and how that might have transferred over to the East in the sort of fine art schools, and where craft can sit in that when we have a country with like thousands and thousands of craft that are specific to different regions. I was really curious how I, living in Canada, can learn. And I was thinking so much about drawing and mark making and thinking about the woodblock as like a unique print that is endlessly repetitive, but still is done by hand. So that's kind of what led me into that. I also was interested in like destabilizing these kinds of hierarchies between art and design and craft, and just really wanting to find a new language that is um, yeah, also looking at everyday objects, like all those kinds of visual elements, and like, you know, this process of dyeing. I mean, Lauren and Mallory, you both dye your own material. I don't. Like, you have, you know, you understand how complex it is and how precarious it is, and you're kind of at the whim of your processes in a lot of ways. And I wanted to leave that knowledge to the people who really know it, but then, you know, also engage them in the kind of forms of research that I do. So the kind of exchange is, I guess, sharing with them how I'm thinking about my practice. And then also, for instance, in February 2020, we all made a trip to the Mill Owners Building together. And that was very interesting after Saleh Mahmoud had already been printing much of the motifs, but then suddenly he's seeing them in this kind of bodily and three-dimensional way. So that's also very interesting, is actually having an exchange and not just, you know, rocking up in Kutch and being like, this is what I want to print, and then leaving right away. It's really a conversation over many years. And then the chintz, like this, what you're showing now is part of current research that I was just doing in Paris in the summer, and looking at the calico axe, because I do want to kind of develop motifs that are really more sort of narrative, but at the same time, questioning if I should be working with Adrak printers, because they don't have any icons in their motifs. So I'm just thinking about that right now, what the next step is, but looking at those languages of block printing and the kind of industrial production that was produced in the sort of south outside of Paris.
Thank you. Lauren, I'll pass it to you to ask also about the importance of context, or not offering context. So how your work either kind of speaks for itself. How do you navigate providing context or not to your viewers?
Yeah, I think because of the subject of a lot of my research, there's a powerful and complicated contrast between the aesthetics and the history of European colonialism that, especially in a place like, you know, 18th century colonial garden can be very, the beauty can be very distracting. And so I'm interested in those layers of what happens when context is withdrawn and then revealed, or what happens when certain certain elements in that structure are hidden or revealed at different times. And actually, I was thinking about this quilt, and the way sometimes a pattern becomes so much more visible when part of the pattern is broken or inverted or messed with, and that's a strategy in modern art and modernist architecture, but being able to have a pattern or a structure that is suddenly made visible because one piece is removed from it, and we become more conscious of its existence, or it becomes a little bit more complicated to consume in some way. Both as a aesthetic strategy, but a metaphor really for how we think about history and materials.
Thank you. Mallory, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I can add. Yeah, I would like to start, maybe with the term terra nullius. So, it's kind of a Latin legal term, meaning the land belongs to no one, or it's land without a master, and it's been historically it was to use to justify kind of the colonization of territories by claiming that lands already inhabited were unoccupied according to kind of European legal standard. And so it's interesting to I think it's important as artists to always think about our positionality. And for example, for me, being also from Belgium, Cameroon, being born in Canada and Montreal, to think about how Montreal is also the land of the Ojibwe Nation, Tiohtià:ke, Montreal, Moniang. And so during the creation of Deborah's Garden, it was important for me to collaborate with Ojibwe traditional herborists. And so I think collaboration is important. Collaboration, co-creation is very much a big part of the reason why I can create today. And for Deborah's Garden, it was important to be in conversation with Andrea McDonald's, Ojibwe traditional herbalist, also a friend who live 1 hour away from Montreal in La Chute, and that kindly offered me, knowledge exchange session about indigenous native plants, and then gave me some plants to incorporate in the garden. So I think collaboration is key. And so yeah.
Thank you. I think at this point we'll look at some of the questions in the chat. And
Yes, thank you so much, Julia, and everyone for this wonderful talk and conversation, and also bringing to life the title Living Libraries in such a wonderful way. So thank you. We have a few questions for panelists, and we have to wrap up pretty soon. So maybe we can answer this question about the mordant. So we have a question who's asking about how you think or deal with mordants in your work. So the mordant can be traditional or modern. So if you have any thoughts on that element.
I mean, isn't indigo the best because we don't need a mordant for it, right? But yeah, I am always experimenting with mordants for the other colors, and I mostly use aluminum triformate because it's easier to use in the context of my garden and my studio. But I am searching still for the perfect mordant.
And I don't know if you want to add to this question, or maybe we can go to the next one. Mallory.
Yeah, I think it's the same. Yeah, indigo doesn't need mordant. For those who doesn't know, like mordant is this kind of compound that allow a certain fiber to accept the dye more easily. It's kind of a chemical process, but indigo, it doesn't need it because it's quite powerful and bind physically to the fiber quite easily and last a long time. So I don't know. Yeah.
That's part of the magic that Swapnaa was mentioning earlier. So we have maybe one more question. Someone asking, thinking about textiles and cultural knowledge, memory and connections with the past. I'm interested whether you feel that these arts can transmit, or how they might transmit, joy, pride, and a sense of the future and connections with future generation. Because we're talking about the past, but what about the future?
I could maybe jump in. I feel like because block printing is so ubiquitous in India, like you see it in the home space, you see it on clothing, it just, there's pride in it, but it's never considered a high art. And so by placing it in the museum context or gallery context, I was very curious to see, does it become something more elevated? And also if each piece is totally unique. So all of the panels in Mobile Palace are unique in their print and dye combination. And then I've added beading and applique. So there's this idea of like, there's no repetition possible, or I've taken out the idea of repetition. And I was thinking about them as like, you know, if a painting is a unique work, can a piece of block printing also be that? And can future generations, especially, let's say, the South Asian diaspora that's, you know, in the West, if they come into a space and they'll instantly recognize that this is block printing on cotton, like I know this inherently, but now it's in a space where you know, it's very disassociated from where it should be, from the body or from the home space. So that for me is really important.